Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. My name is Samuel with Cedar Pine Designs, and in today's video I take this lower portion of a China hutch and restore it while repairing it and adding a new base to it. So let's jump straight into this one. When I originally bought this China hutch, it had a display case, top section in glass. I don't have a video on that because I really just had to polish it up and throw a base on the bottom of it to make it its own separate piece. I do have pictures of that up on my Instagram if you'd like to take a look at that. But for this piece, it did have some damage to the very top drawer. It, I guess during the moving process from the people that I got it from, dropped the drawer and it completely broken apart. So right now we're just gonna glue that back together, and then I'm gonna use a pin nailer to hold it all together while it dries, and then we're gonna move on to the rest of the project. So after messing with this drawer for a little while, adding some glue and some pin nails, I did finally get it put back together, and the only kind of damage that was left was on the drawer face, and I was able to sand most of that out later on in the video. I'm trying to keep this piece as original as possible, but I am going to be adding a new base to this one to give it more of a mid-century style feel and get it up off the ground. And right here you can see that I am starting to cut up some of the wood, and I believe this is the section where I'm cutting 15-degree angles so that I can make the feet for this base, and it's gonna raise it up off the ground and it's gonna look really good. So like I said, the angle for these is 15 degrees, and I'm gonna make the length of the legs about 8 inches because I really want this thing to sit taller than it originally did. And I'm using solid, I believe this is poplar. It's either poplar or pine, but I'm repurposing some of the base to create the stretchers between the legs, and you'll see me do that a little bit later on in the video. Now it's time for me to take this thing apart and lighten it up a little bit so I can move it around better. I'm taking all the drawers out, and I'm going to flip this thing around because this is where I am going to take off the old base so that I can make room for the new base. So I'm trying my best not to damage any of this wood right here because I plan on reusing it as the stretchers across the sides and the face of it. So I had to remove all these glue blocks that help to keep the original base secure down to the bottom. It was a little tough. The glue was holding on pretty good, but after a little beating with a chisel and a hammer, it took care of that right away. Although I couldn't find a maker's mark for this piece, I do know that it's a 1968 period piece, mid-century, according to the stamp on the bottom of the piece. It is made of solid wood with veneer over top, and the veneer is very beautiful, and I want to try to keep all of that intact. So I'm using this long level to give me a guide to where I can place my feet so that the edges of the feet, the angled part, line straight up with the sides, so that way from a visual angle I'm not going to go outside and too far wide with my base or too far inward with it. So here you can see me repurposing the stretcher that I previously removed. It did have some 45-degree angles on it that had to be cut off, and I believe it was a little too thick, so I did have to cut it down, but I couldn't find any footage of me doing that. But I did cut it down to length, and then I did rip it down to match the sides of this piece that I'm using right here, which is some either poplar or pine, and it turns out very, very nice. One of the best ways that I found so far to put these things together is a Craig pocket hole jig. I'm sure there's some stronger ways to hold these things together, like with dowels and glue and stuff, but for my case, this is the easiest method for me. You set the depth of the drill bit to 3/4 inch, which is the thickness of the material that I'm using, and you set the depth of the Craig jig to 3/4 inches to match as well, and you just drill your holes. So because I had to cut the stretchers at the same 15-degree angle to match the legs, you do have to angle your piece at, flat with that 15-degree edge, so that way your pocket holes are going to line up so that you can drill into your feet and attach those to the stretcher. After building a few of these bases, I found that pre-drilling the holes before screwing in your screws definitely helps to keep from splitting the wood on the feet, because I do like to attach it flat to the face, and I've had a problem before when screwing in the screws without a pre-drilled hole. It splits it thus wasting, you know, all that material. And sometimes I'd have to go to the store just to buy more in order to replace that foot. So make sure you pre-drill those holes out. Even though these screws would be plenty strong enough to hold this all together and support the weight of the dresser, I do like to use some wood glue because obviously I don't ever plan on taking this thing apart, so it just adds to the strength and just that extra peace of mind. So far for every base that I've built, I use a 1/8 inch roundover bit to soften all the edges rather than try to sand them, so that way at least it looks a lot more uniform and those edges don't look too blocky and sharp. So right here I'm taking off the doors because I plan on doing a full restoration on this thing, and I want to be able to sand the back of those doors down so I can restain everything in a dark walnut color, and the hinges, they just gotta go in order for me to do that. I'm using my TSP degreaser to clean everything so that way none of the dirt and grime block up any of my sanding pads, which would then, you know, waste material. I'm using 150 grit sandpaper to sand the base down. I'm trying to get all those joints where the wood meets up really flush, because for this I'm not staining the base the same color as the body because I want to give it a little bit of contrast. Also, it's not going to match even if I tried to stain it, so I'm going to give it a nice coat of black paint and it's really going to set this piece off. And for the top, I'm using 150 grit sandpaper as well. This piece, it seemed to not have like a polyurethane thick finish over it. It was mostly seemed like it was a stain, and maybe they just used oil or wax to keep it nice and fresh because it sanded off fairly easy. So because this China hutch did have a top portion to it, the top was a little off on the color, so I had to really sand that down to get some of the scratches out as well. And I'm using a premium Verathane wood stain that dries in 1 hour, and this one is dark walnut. And I wanted to get away a little bit from that reddish tint, so I tried to go with a darker brown color, and I think that it came out very, very nice. After putting on one coat, I found that that was more than enough to give it the color that I was looking for, and even though this stuff says it has about an hour dry time, I did give it a few more hours before I moved on to the top coat and those other steps that come right after this. So if any of my earlier viewers remember, I did have this piece once before, and I did the same thing as I am for this one by separating it. But my first one, the lady who bought it did want the piece put back together as a full China hutch. So this one I was able to separate and sell both pieces separate. But the steps to this one is exactly the same. I'm using Limousine leather paint mixed with a little bit of water just to dilute it out for my HVLP spray gun. And I'm gonna do 3 to 4 coats because it is bare wood and it was soaking up a lot of the paint. So I just went ahead and just put about 4 coats of that on there with some sanding in between with 220. And before my last coat, I like to use 400 grit sandpaper just to keep from scratching it too much and giving it a nice smooth finish. I have had people ask me if I wear masks while I spray, and definitely I am trying to get better at that. I was wearing one in that clip, and then after spraying, I move on to finishing up the inside with some Howard's Feed and Wax. The inside's in not terrible shape, it was just really dry. In order to sand the inside down to restain it, it wasn't really worth it because it's really hard to get up against those cracks. So I just waxed the shelf and I put it right back in, and everything turned out great. I'm reinstalling all these hinges, and there are a ton of screws to put in to get these things hung back up because I want to get the doors on, because I plan on clear coating everything while it's together with the drawers and the doors all installed. The doors are installed, it's time to add the base to the bottom. So I lay the dresser on its back and I line the base up perfectly with a measuring tape, and I use my pocket hole screws to attach it to the bottom. I didn't use wood glue for this because you never know if the customer or whoever ends up with this dresser is going to want to remove it and maybe add some new legs, so I didn't want to make it too difficult to remove those. Now that everything's put together, I am getting my favorite Verathane polyurethane in a satin finish. It's water-based, and because it is a little thinner than like paint would be, I don't have to mix it with water. I decided to just paint the drawers outside of the dresser because I wanted to be able to get the sides. and I'm gonna do 3 coats of this with scuff sanding in between each coat with 400 grit sandpaper. I do get a lot of questions about why I sand between each coat, and it's because after each coat, if you rub your hand across it, it is a little rough to the touch, so it makes it nice and smooth, and it also gives each coat something very good to bond to, just creating a, more durability with the finish. So luckily for me, out in California where I live, the weather is really nice and really warm, so coats of this stuff will dry in almost 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes, because I'm gonna scuff sand it, and I can move on and do all 3 coats in about maybe an hour and a half tops. Typically on my last coat that I like to spray, I go a little slower, so that way the finish ends up a lot thicker on the top for that last coat, so that way it dries nice and smooth. You don't really want to try that on any of the surfaces that are facing sideways, such as the sides and the face, because it'll cause drips and you don't want to have to sand all that stuff out. Normally don't show this part, but this is me just setting up my staging area so that I can take some nice photos of this. I just have a nice clean carpet and a clean background, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add all the drawers back to this piece, so that way we can go ahead and take a look at how this piece turned out, and I'm very happy with it. I couldn't be happier with the way that this piece turned out. The base is very nice and the color turned out perfect. So let's go ahead and go over the numbers like I usually do at the end of each video. So I paid $75 for this piece. In actuality, it was $150, but the top portion, I sold it separately, so I separated the price. I paid $50 in material for the base, the stain, and the top coat, bringing me up to $125 total. And I sold for $650 plus delivery, leaving me with $475 in profit over the course of 7 hours, leaving me with $68 an hour, which is a pretty great return for this piece. I'd like to thank everybody for making it this far with me and for all the support that I've been getting on all my social platforms, and I can't wait to see you guys on my next project.